Hi, my name's Scott the Miniature Maniac, and today we're messing with technology that I have never touched before. What up, Mini family? Recently I got a little surprise in the mail. Who needs bucks? My heart is racing. Oh, I gotta do it so many more times. Oh, I'd buy this just to do this over and over again. It's the Anycubic Photon S. The box came with a lot of fun stuff. The machine itself, the build plate for it, filters, masks, gloves, tools, an extra FEP filter for my resin vat, manuals, 500 milliliter of their standard resin, an additional 500 milliliter of their new plant-based resin, which if I drink would cause me to experience death much more slowly than if I had drank regular liquid resin. I'm just joking, don't drink liquid resin, you'll die. The plant-based stuff is more eco-friendly, the resin has a little bit of bend to it, and it smells better. As a side note, Anycubic is offering a coupon for the Anycubic Photon S. You can find the link and also the coupon in the description to get 20 bucks off your first resin 3D printer. Anycubic sent me a lot of stuff, and if you're anything like me, you think 3D printing is scary, expensive, and error-prone, so I needed to do some serious research before attempting anything. I started with the manual, which had information about getting started with the machine, leveling the print bed, and then some information about setting up your models for printing. I felt like I needed more info, so I took to YouTube and started to absorb knowledge as fast as I could. I'll have all the most helpful content that I've found linked in the description for you to check out if you're on a similar journey. Okay, here's my totally beginner take on how the Anycubic Photon S and other resin 3D printers works. Each printer has an LCD screen at the bottom that shoots UV rays up through your resin vat in very specific shapes. These specific shapes are determined by a slicer, which is a necessary tool that informs your printer about how many layers your model needs to print in. The taller the model, the more layers you need. A typical height for one of these layers is about 40 microns, but can be as little as 20 or even 10 microns. Once your 3D model is broken into slices, notice the pictures on the right side, you import that into your 3D printer and print each slice one by one, exposing each slice to UV light for enough time for it to cure most of the way. The model prints from the bottom up, upside down, as the build plate pulls up from the liquid resin and reveals your model micron by micron. Okay, now that we're all on the same page, let's actually print something. Okay, now that I've downloaded information about 3D printing into my brain like Neo in the Matrix, I'm going to give my first print a shot. I found a model on Thingiverse, a 28mm scale dwarf. I set my printer settings in Shitu box, and I also set up my support settings, gave it a good slicerino, and we're gonna print our first thing on here. I got a space heater next to it to keep the resin nice and hot, not blowing directly at the resin, but kind of off in the immediate area so that it hopefully flows nicely. I know it's gonna fail. I feel like everyone's first print fails, and I'm terrified, but let's just give it a shot. Again, I was terrified, but I started the print and I let it go. Until my power went out. Apparently space heaters and hair dryers don't get along very well. Who would have thought that an outlet upstairs and one in the basement would be on the same breaker? Well, I said it, didn't I? Everyone's first print fails, and mine was no exception. I peeled the model off of the build plate and got a good look at it. It was quite funny looking at the partially completed print. It was a perfect chunk of the miniature. Oh well, time to move on. I cleaned up the build plate and went on to round number 2. This time putting my printer on a different breaker with a universal power supply to keep it alive a little bit longer if the power went out again. I started this print at 11 p.m. and then I went to bed. And I couldn't sleep at all. I was worrying about this print all night long. I needed some liquid encouragement. After some beer and some Dorvads, I finally got some sleep. When I awoke, I was rewarded with a successful print. I'm gonna say if I hadn't had a power failure on the first one, it would have went perfectly. I didn't change a single thing about the print the second time around. But how was the quality? Well, let's cure them outside in the sun and then paint them up and take a look. While I hastily paint up this mini, I want to thank Ken, Jess, and Pixel to Plastic, 3 patrons of mine who were basically on call while I was messing with this, answering all my questions. In addition to them, I'd like to thank Ilya Rocklin, Nick Kozlowski, Tomk301, Michael Wolf, Minimad, Kyle, Rafaela Moreau, Trevor Lebert, Kellum Templeton Smith, Garrett Brocksmith, Mr. Brooks, Levi Nesbitt, Andrew Ross, Francis DeWatt, Weston Burke, Breath of the Dragon, Dan Clements, Jonathan Westmoreland, Ian Wickhorst, Blake, Wilson Greenbeach, Omar Mark Fawar, Andy Y, Barking Dero, A Melodic, Thomas Croth, Casman Spork, TSJ, Joseph Barrow, and my sister and brother-in-law, Katie and Joe, for being my new Dark Wizard patrons. You guys and all of my other patrons are what enables me to make videos about this intensely nerdy topic full-time. So from the bottom of my mini heart, thank you. If you want to support me and these nerdy videos on Patreon, you can find more information about that linked in the description. I gotta say, I knew 3D printing was capable of amazing detail. In fact, in this current day and age, people print their master sculpts on a 3D printer and then mold and cast their production models off of that 3D model. But those machines, like the Forms Labs machines, are thousands of dollars. With this little, relatively inexpensive machine, I was able to print this mini and paint it up and no one would know that it was a 3D printed model. There isn't a print line in sight. I was so encouraged by this that I had to print more. But first, it was clear to me that my 3D printing tooling was lacking. So I had to take a trip to every American's favorite store, Walmart. I picked up a 3-inch metal putty knife, a cookie sheet, some isopropyl alcohol, and some shop towels. Other useful things I purchased online were a UV light enclosure and an ultrasonic cleaner, which I already have for miniature painting. Now that I'm tooled up, I'm good to proceed. Before getting a 3D printer, one of the prospects that I was excited about was printing out little terrain bits and bobs to spice up my scenic bases and add a little extra sauce. So let's do that. I found these awesome little shelves with lobes, bottles, and barrels on them, and I printed them out. Now starting to experiment with some of the printer settings, seeing some minor failure in one of my prints as my shelves were drooping a little bit. At this point, I had figured out my post-processing procedure. Extract the model from the build plate carefully, trying not to scratch it. I still totally scratched it. Clean off the model and the build plate with isopropyl alcohol. Cut off the supports. Clean the model in an ultrasonic cleaner and then cure it in a UV enclosure. These shelves looked pretty awesome, so I printed out more terrain pieces like these little sci-fi crates. I could probably scratch build these things, but instead of doing that, I could print them and work on something else for my diorama in the meantime and be more efficient. At this point, I was totally addicted. I needed to know other places to get 3D models. Up until this point, I was getting all my stuff on Thingiverse, which is a fantastic resource for free 3D models, but I was ready to take the plunge to actually pay for 3D sculpts. So I did some digging. My first buy was a Ganon, the Undying King from Comet Lord Miniatures. The Undying King? Giant skeleton dude? That sounds right up my alley. And I started printing this guy immediately. But wait, there's more. I discovered a Patreon page that has a tier for models each month called Artisans Guild. And this current month, they were doing a vampire theme. Vampires? Vampires? Where? If there's anything that you need to know about me, is that I love vampires. Beyond that, there are numerous Kickstarters and Patreons that reward pledges with 3D sculpts. One that I'll note is a friend of mine on YouTube, and that's Danny from 3D Printed Tabletop. He has a Kickstarter that's currently taking in late pledges on Backer It with a bunch of great fantasy sculpts. These guys and so many more are a fantastic resource for excellent 3D sculpts. The ones I said out loud and also additional ones will be linked in the description of this video. For real, the description is a gold mine in this video. You are missing out if you don't check it out. So compared to conventional miniatures, what are the pros and cons? Well, let's start with the pros. There are no mold lines to deal with, which is awesome. 3D sculpts are significantly cheaper than whole miniatures on average. And finally, you can print models at different sizes. I printed again at 2 different heights, and now they can be used in different scales. Moving on to the cons, while there are no mold lines you have to remove, you still have to deal with removing supports. Supports are like flashing that are necessary to keep certain parts of the miniature in place while it's printing. Remember that droopy shelf earlier? Well, that happened because I had no supports holding that shelf in place as it printed. This stuff can be an incredible pain to remove, but how many supports to place and where they go is a skill that not everyone is equal at. And not all models even need supports. There were some models that I printed that didn't need any at all, and they came out great. No cleanup needed. Whereas others needed a ton and they suck to remove, and oftentimes a portion of the model itself gets chipped off. Honestly, I'd rather deal with mold lines than dealing with this stuff. Con number 2, resin printing is messy and you need to deal with liquid resin and have proper protection while doing so. Con number 3, the machine is expensive and liquid resin can get pretty expensive. And con number 4, most of the 3D sculpts that I were finding were basically heroic scale on crack. Their fists and feet and heads were absolutely gigantic and they looked totally cartoony. I'm guessing this is kind of a limitation of the medium resin printers not being able to render detail as great as resin in a mold, but I assume that over time this will get better. I'm guessing that I probably missed some pros and cons. Feel free to leave what you think are pros and cons in the comment section and we can kind of get a little conversation going. Side note, up until this point I had been 3D printing nonstop, which meant that I didn't need to clean out my resin vat at all. I did it one time when I switched between the normal liquid resin and the plant-based stuff. But suffice to say that at some point you're going to need to do it, and typically you pour the resin through some kind of filter to get rid of the particulates and clean out the vat with a cotton swab as to not damage the FEP at all. And this can get a little bit messy, but it's necessary because resin doesn't like to sit around for too long. I can't tell you if 3D printing is right for you. What I can tell you is that I am super excited about it and I had a blast printing this past week. I know Anycubic is sponsoring this video, but I'm so glad they reached out to me and gave me this opportunity to work in this new medium. I was shrugging off 3D printing for so long, but it is genuinely enjoyable. So what do you guys and gals think? Are you going to give it a shot? Are you already printing stuff? Let me know where you get your awesome sculpts. Also, let me know what your reservations about 3D printing are, whether it's price or quality or just intimidation. Thanks for checking out my 3D printing exploration video and also for checking out my channel. If you guys like the channel and you want to support it, there are many ways that you can do that, namely a Patreon campaign, there's merchandise, and also shopping on Amazon with my affiliate link. In the description, you can find all those things, including all the tools that I used in the course of this video for 3D printing. And purchasing using these links gets me a little bit of extra kickback and no extra cost to you. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to